Washington, D.C., the seat of political power in the United States of America and home to many national monuments, museums and statues. Also the host of 176 foreign embassies and home to the headquarters of many international organizations, trade unions, non-profit organizations, lobby groups and professional associations. But it was from the 4th to the 7th of August that US President Barak Obama welcomed leaders from across the African continent to the city for a 3-day US-Africa Leaders Summit.
With 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies, Africa represents unparalleled opportunities for investment and trade. Over the next 3 days, business and political leaders from the US and Africa will come together to find practical ways of tapping into Africa's markets.
Themed Investing in the Next Generation, the summit followed on the President's trip to the African continent back in June 2013.
When I was traveling throughout Africa last year, what I heard was the desire of Africans not just for aid, but for trade and development that actually helps nations grow and empowers Africans for the long term. As President, I made it clear that the United States is determined to be a partner in Africa's success, a good partner, an equal partner, and a partner for the long term. We don't look to Africa simply for its natural resources. We recognize Africa for its greatest resource, which is its people and its talents and their potential. We don't simply want to extract minerals from the ground for our growth. We want to build genuine partnerships that create jobs and opportunity for all our peoples and that unleash the next era of African growth.
But just how significant is this summit in Washington?
President Barack Obama came under intense criticism for the absence of Africa on his foreign policy radar in his first term. Many see this summit as a last-ditch attempt to leave some sort of legacy with the African continent.
Obama's 2 predecessors both secured legacy achievements in Africa, Bill Clinton through the launch of his African Growth and Opportunity Act, and George W. Bush through his program called PEPFAR, supporting HIV/AIDS prevention, treatment and care, both of which still form strong pillars of the economic relations between the US and Africa. For Obama, the neglect of Africa in his first term must be a strong motivator, and security cooperation in the US strategy for fighting global terrorism is certainly a big factor. But it's the global economic competition that must be the key driver behind this move. Africa's international relations remain driven by the vast natural resources that foreigners want and need. But it's Obama's strengthening and deepening ties with the continent that is an indicator of Africa's relevance to the functioning of the global economy.
Of all the goods we export to the world, only about 1% goes to sub-Saharan Africa. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have to do better, much better. I want Africans buying more American products. I want Americans buying more African products. I know you do too, and that's what you're doing here today.
The United States has some catching up to do when it comes to trade and investment with Africa. China's imports of African oil and natural minerals have grown over the past 2 decades. Over the last 10 years, Africa's overall trade volume with its traditional partners, China and the European Union, has more than doubled. The European Union still represents more than 40% of Africa's trade, around $256 billion, and almost 3 times that of China.
There's quite a lot that is happening. You know, the whole cake has not been taken away by China. The cake is big, and I'm sure America too will have its own fair share.
Critics are talking of a 21st century scramble for Africa, with different parts of the world eagerly courting the attention of African countries for their natural resources, their middle class's growing appetite for consumer goods, and high rates of return on investment. Donald Kaberuka of the African Development Bank says it's a meaningless catchphrase.
The scramble for Africa in 1884 was colonial powers scrambling to divide up Africa to serve the colonial economies, to serve their interest. In this time round, it is Africans serving their own continent. And everybody's welcome. Chinese, Russians, Americans, Europeans, Malaysians, Brazilians, everybody's welcome. So I don't call this a scramble, I call it a rush for opportunities.
People in the United States need to actually appreciate the reality of Africa. You know, it's not enough to listen to to the international news, I won't mention names, that tell you that all that sells in Africa is gloom and doom and poverty and nothing is going on. And that mental model to the typical American, is one that over the years has sort of put the Americans off. And while that's been happening, you find out that the more aggressive countries like China, like India, surprisingly, and some other Asian countries, they really got up and said, look, you know what, we think that there's a lot that we can do in Africa. And it's a selfish move, but it's not a selfish move that one would have anything against, a mutually beneficial one. China comes to Africa, it needs the resources, it needs the oil, it needs the minerals and so on to drive its economy. And it's saying that in doing that, this is what we will give you back in return. And that's why it's been very aggressive in all that. And people can complain about their tactics or the kind of things they do, but the fact still remains that they've made a move. I think as far as America is concerned, they've been a bit laid back as far as concerned, maybe a bit complacent, if I can say that. But the reality is that maybe now they can really get up because the affiliation or relationship of Africa with America is something that I regard as normal compared to the abnormal with the likes of China and so on, which has never really been on the scene. So I think America's been slow as far as that's concerned, and we'll be glad to move forward with them.
Sentiment that was echoed by the chairman of Stanbic IBTC when he was asked about the investment conversation and where Africa is now.
A decade ago, many years ago, it was not like that. We were talking about Africa and they had no interest. So now we're both interested, so it's good news.
Fellow countryman Tony Elumelu praised the US efforts and encouraged African business leaders to get involved.
The African private sector business leaders should take advantage of this to invest and to cut new friendship and new partners. The American business leaders should see this moment an opportunity to identify credible and good African business leaders who understand how to do business on the continent. The US government must seize this as an opportunity to catch up with others who are doing quite a lot already to support or to partner with Africa. And the African government also must do more in terms of commitment to reform programs that will help prepare our operating environment to be conducive to attract foreign investment, in fact even local investment. And if you look at it and you say to yourself, 5 years down the line, what can come out of this? I am optimistic that 5 years down the line, 35 years down the line, something significant will come out of this, because the kind of, in this 21st century, the kind of African private sector leaders we have, different from the time we had 20 years ago. You have African private sector leaders who have capital to invest, who are not just fronting for companies. You have private sector African leaders who have come to this kind of summit with intelligence and with competence.
Private sector support for governments was also on hand. William Mackenzie, country manager at Bechtel Gabon, explains.
I believe there's a huge opportunity in supporting governments. What does that mean? That means helping governments execute their infrastructure programs. Every country needs roads, every country needs schools, every country needs airports, but what's the biggest impediment? Institutions. And therefore, our biggest value add, our biggest support to governments is to help them on setting up institutions. So that is what we're trying to do when we meet several governments, in particular in Gabon. We're helping to ensure that their institutions are capable to execute infrastructure programs to deliver the top quality infrastructure they need for their countries.
The summit facilitated not only business deals, but also discussions and action on development. It was an opportunity to assess the initiatives that have been running, to look at their sustainability and reassess their value.
The summit sideline events are aimed at creating a space where candid and often difficult conversations can take place. Can AGOA revitalize Africa's agricultural industry? Can the Power Africa initiative keep the lights on the continent? These are just some of the questions that the delegates will be taking on.
The objective is to get the private sector far more engaged in Africa. And to that extent, it's also a recognition that no matter what comes out of the White House meetings, the private sector is going to be responsible for what happens next in power, in trade, anything else. So this is the mobilization of the private sector.
A commitment of $12 billion was made towards Power Africa, Obama's initiative targeted at addressing electricity shortages. US Aid and others committed $38 million to establish leadership centers for young Africans. Leaders also welcomed the announcement of new investment commitments to the new Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which has now mobilized more than $10 billion. They pledged that agriculture, nutrition and food security would remain high on their shared agenda. Felusho Phillips, chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, summed up the need in one word: partnerships.
Partnership, global, strong partnership. I tell people that it's not just about throwing dollars at a particular project or intention. We need the people, we need technology, we need support, we need skills, we need know-how, we need a lot of done it before and been down this road before. And I believe that the United States can offer a lot of help in that area.
And Wale Tinubu, Group Chief Executive Officer of Oando, added his voice to the invitation to do business in Nigeria.
From a Nigerian perspective, I think simply, we've had some bad press from a security perspective regarding incidents of Boko Haram. And I think being able to refocus the good side of Nigeria and making it clear that Nigeria is open for business, the opportunities that are here. We've had extensive presentations from the ministers across the board, agriculture, power, health, education, ICT. And what we've been able to achieve really is to switch the perspective to focus on the fact that it's a vast country, 170 million people. It's 6-7% growth. It's an economy that's truly open for business, which is private sector driven, and one in which regulation is strong, and it's there is an enabling environment for investors globally to come into the Nigerian economy.
After the break, we take a look at the issues that are dominating this inaugural US Africa Summit. Welcome back. We're coming to you from the first US Africa Summit here in Washington, D.C. On this first day of the summit, President Barak Obama is not only celebrating his birthday, but possibly is also celebrating the first real steps of real engagement between the US and the continent of Africa.
In an effort to strengthen America's financial foothold in Africa, President Obama announced $33 billion in commitments aimed at shifting US ties with Africa beyond humanitarian aid and towards more equal economic partnerships.
So the bottom line is the United States is making a major and long-term investment in Africa's progress. Taken together, the new commitments I've described today across our government and by our many partners total some $33 billion. And that will support development across Africa and jobs here in the United States.
US companies showed commitment, announcing $14 billion in investments. Among them, a $5 billion investment from Coca-Cola to fund manufacturing lines and production equipment. A $2 billion investment from GE by 2018 for facility development, skills training and sustainability initiatives. $200 million in investments by Marriott, opening 36 new hotels and hiring 10,000 new employees by 2020, expanding its reach to 16 countries. Arnie Sorensen, President and CEO of Marriott International, was upbeat with accolades for the discussions around opportunity.
Our business, obviously, in the hotel space and the travel business is about tourism, which most people think of first. But it's also really about commerce, and it's about people moving from place to place, doing business, having meetings, doing the things that they do. And so the conversation here today is fabulous for our business because it shines a light on the opportunity which is in Africa. Africa is obviously a place which is rich with opportunity. It's rich with complexity, too. And every country is different. It is a continent, not a country, right? And so we'll go through each of those issues. But just the attention that's been brought here this morning is great. There are infrastructure conversations, of course. Infrastructure includes not just things like roads and bridges and telecom, but it also includes travel. Where do the planes go? Can they go from country to country without having to go back long haul to Europe or to the Middle East to connect? What's the visa policy look like? Those are important infrastructure issues for us, too.
Earlier this year, US Aid announced a partnership with GE and Kenya Commercial Bank set to make up to $10 million in credit available for Kenyan health facilities to buy medical products. It was the first time the agency partnered with a multinational company to extend credit guarantees that unlock local financing.
We have a very specific large partnership with General Electric, which is the largest company today, on healthcare. You know, one of the challenges we say in our market in Africa is access to affordable healthcare and good diagnosis. So we set up a program with them, this year, in the beginning of the year. And my coming year actually was come and say, we are running, what is the progress? We're working with MasterCard. We're launching with them a program to have 10 million cards in our markets. It was never had in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years.
From neighboring Tanzania, the investment center had also successfully negotiated partnerships.
We closed it with 2 deals, which we're very excited about. One of them is a transport logistics initiative, $132 million, which seeks to decongest Dar es Salaam as a city by creating dry ports further away from the city. And this is wonderful for us because Dar es Salaam will always be congested. So we've seen that US investors have taken a keen interest in logistics, and we embrace that and celebrate that because our roads are simply overwhelmed. We're also very excited about the value that the US government brings to the table in terms of supporting US companies and giving them that level of comfort. It translates to cheaper capital because risk is costed and mitigated by other intermediaries, but it also results in bringing caliber private sector providers with established brands and excellent track records to Tanzania, which is exactly what we need. The other deal that we closed isn't as significant value terms, but impact-wise probably is even more significant. That deal is in agriculture, and what it's seeking to do is create value chains in livestock. We want to bring in a new brand of cattle in Tanzania to offset the challenges that are associated with migrant herds of population moving around and clashing with pastoralists. But much more than that, there's an undersupply of meat.
A total of $6 billion in partnerships was announced by Aliko Dangote with the Blackstone Group and Carlyle for energy projects.
Well, one of the deals is between our company, Dangote Industries Limited in Nigeria, with Blackstone. And this is a deal to invest in infrastructure, mainly power, generation, power distribution, power transmission, and gas pipelines, anything to do coal-based, anything to do with power. This is total of $5 billion, which we just announced, today. And then we have another one with Carlyle, which is to do with agriculture, oil refining, and also financial services. This deal is $1 billion.
Standard Bank and GE announced a partnership aimed at bridging the power financing gap in Africa. The strategic partnership has already seen both companies commit to a $350 million financing agreement aimed at improving access to power infrastructure. Africa needs to add an extra 300 gigawatts of power generating capacity over the next 15 years in order to meet demand, which is expected to grow at an average annual rate of 3% over the next 2 decades. It was during his 2013 visit to 3 African countries that President Obama announced an initiative aimed at addressing this power deficit. A $7 billion commitment to Power Africa from the US government over 5 years, to be supplemented by more than $9 billion in leveraged private investments to expand electricity access to at least 20 million new households and businesses. However, with new commitments, the President was able to increase their goal.
We've joined with African governments, the African Development Bank, and the private sector, and I will tell you, the response has exceeded our projections. It has been overwhelming. Already, projects and negotiations are underway that, when completed, will put us nearly 80% of the way toward our goal. On top of the significant resources we've already committed, I'm announcing that the United States will increase our pledge to $300 million a year for this effort. And as of today, including an additional $12 billion in new commitments being announced this week by our private sector partners and the World Bank and the government of Sweden, we've now mobilized a total of more than $26 billion to Power Africa, just since we announced it. $26 billion. So today we're raising the bar. We decided we're meeting our goal too easily, Zuma. So we got to go up. So we're tripling our goal. aiming to bring electricity to more than 60 million African homes and businesses that can spark growth for decades to come.
Another sector that received much attention was agriculture, and for Nigeria, the needs are as follows.
In the last 10 years, we have been focusing on agro-ally business, the entire value chain in Nigeria. It's not just processing, but also having a backward integration that will improve local content, and then create well along the value chain that will make agriculture really sustainable, in Nigeria. And on each part of, or on every part of the value chain, America should be looking at this and see how they can invest, particularly improving infrastructure in Nigeria and helping with power and water resources in particular, and also creating opportunity for funding.
Leaders further agreed on the importance of the prompt, long-term renewal of an enhanced African Growth and Opportunity Act. The current mandate expires on 30 September 2015. They pledged to work together to increase its utilization by African countries.
I believe that the AGOA ought to be and should be renewed. There are huge opportunities for us in Africa in exporting non-traditional exports to United States. Today, U.S. is self-sufficient in petroleum products, so they don't need petroleum products from Africa. But we have a lot of agricultural produce that we can export to the United States, and that will actually help rural economies.
Following the AGOA Forum, ministers of trade from those African countries that are eligible for the trade preferences under the Act were upbeat about the renewal.
We have been hoping that there would be an early, seamless renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and the summit was also preceded by the AGOA Forum, Ministerial Forum, and I think we heard a pretty positive message from the United States, both from the administration as well as from Congress people who are participating. And basically they were saying that they were supportive of a seamless renewal of AGOA, which would include ourselves as South Africa, along basically the existing lines. There would be a non-reciprocal preference arrangement, but that they would consider also improving the product coverage, although they told us that that would be quite difficult because some of the agricultural products and the clothing textile products, which are at the moment not included, are quite sensitive here, and they would improve the rules of origin.
It's understood that tariff preferences alone are not sufficient to boost trade. For the benefits of AGOA to be truly maximized, it must be linked to a comprehensive trade, investment and development strategy. So what of the summit's impact? It certainly has shifted US relations with Africa into a higher gear and confirmed that President Obama will pay greater attention to Africa during his final 2 years in the Oval Office. African Development Bank President Donald Kaberuka was of the opinion that the summit came at an important time, defining the relationship between Africa and America in a respectful and mutually beneficial way.
Over the last 10 years, there have been tectonic shifts in the world economy, in the global trade, and inside Africa. Now, because of this rapid pace, fast change, there's an asymmetry of information of what Africa is all about. So there are some people who are still stuck in the Africa of yesteryear, and they have difficulties understanding what is going in Rwanda and Angola, in Equatorial Guinea, in South Africa, in Rwanda and Ethiopia. And so it was important that we come here, governments, business community, to close that information gap and to talk about the future and opportunities which abound on our continent.
3 days of deliberations. The real test for this first US-Africa summit will be whether these talks will translate into real trade and investment. From me and the team here in Washington, D.C., it's goodbye for now.